Now, can everybody hear me all right? Great. I have to start, unfortunately, because one doesn't generally want to start launching a book with an apology. Normally, I pride myself on the animation and the energy that I put into my presentations. But very unfortunately, I've had rather a startling month, and I've spent most of it in hospital. About a month ago, I couldn't have told you where the pancreas was, what it did, or what acute pancreatitis is. Now, unfortunately, I know. I don't recommend it. So this is my first day trying to work back in the office. And I've been rather badly out of touch, in fact, as badly out of touch with the markets as I've been at any point in somewhat over a decade over the last 3 weeks. So this is going to be a lower octane presentation than I would normally wish, for which I apologize. And also, while I understand there have been some extremely interesting events in the markets in the last few weeks, I haven't, due to circumstances beyond my control, been able to keep up with the markets the way I normally would. And so I'm less able to really comment incisively on what's actually happened in these last few weeks than I normally would. I don't think anything has happened that particularly changes the thesis of the book, which is meant to be an extremely long-term book. Anyway, so my apologies. I will try to get through this as best I can, and please be gentle. Now, the genesis of the book, or where the idea came from, was somewhat over 3 years ago now. We had just had what's now come to be known as the Shanghai surprise, the day when the Shanghai Composite fell 9% in the morning, and then we very suddenly had a big spurt of volatility, and we had a very scary moment in the Wall Street afternoon when the Dow Jones gapped down by several hundred points, and the VIX index of volatility sparked upwards, having been previously at historic lows, and very significantly, in my opinion, the volatility never got back down. That was, in many ways, the moment when what people call the Great Moderation in markets had ended. And at that point, I was writing the short view column for the FT, which is meant that I had to write a column each day trying to analyze and explain what was going on. And that was quite difficult when events were as chaotic as they were. And I was also charged with being the mentor or overseeing the younger graduate trainee intake people that we had who were working the market reports. I can see some fine graduates of that program here today. So I can remember explaining to the stock market reporter at the time that you'll often get very strange correlations after a big shock. So you might see that the foreign exchange and the stock markets are moving in line, and this is all down to shifts in risk appetite. And then we did as we always habitually do in these occasions, and went to the Bloomberg, where you can fix things up on 2 screens, and took a look at what the S&P stock index was doing minute by minute during the day. And then took a look at what the yen-dollar exchange rate was doing during the day. And it was quite scary because you literally could not tell the difference between the 2 lines. Every minute throughout the day, they moved completely in line with each other. And we ended up, it became almost a parlor game. The next day, still these 2 markets were moving completely in alignment with each other, and so on. And I really couldn't give a good, clear explanation to a young journalist as to quite why this was going on. And it was also very plain that this was not normal, that this is not behavior that you would normally expect. I've since talked to economists, econometricians. Over the previous 20 years, the average correlation between those two markets, the S&P stock market and the yen-dollar exchange rate, was zero, which is what you'd expect. They'll have brief periods of correlating with each other to some extent. But when you just think of the number of different reasons people might have for buying or selling an American stock, or the number of different reasons people might have for exchanging between dollars and yen, plainly you wouldn't expect them to be very closely related. In the period since the Shanghai surprise movement, movements in those two markets have been sufficient to explain 40%. One movement in the yen is sufficient to explain 40% of the move that day in the S&P, and vice versa. Now, people might say, so what? Basically, the price of the S&P has a huge effect on the cost of capital, on the cost of what it takes to acquire a company in this country. Similarly, the yen-dollar exchange rate affects the terms of trade between two of the biggest economies on the planet. If they are that closely linked to each other when there is no obvious reason why they should be, that implies that those prices are being set inefficiently, and that's obviously extremely bad news for a capitalist system which requires a market to basically work so that it sets prices that clear. In many ways, one of the titles we actually considered for the book, this was a kind of fearful symmetry. Plainly very unhealthy that markets were being driven this way. So that was the first thing I wanted to try to explain, was why so many disparate markets became so symmetrical, how they came to move in alignment with each other. And the second point, obviously, as we went through 2007, the issue of bye-bye Windows, the issue of investment bubbles became ever more important, because quite a number of them began bursting in that year, and plainly very many more burst altogether in 2008. It's not just a question of markets moving in a line with each other. It's when markets all form a bubble together and then burst together, as we discovered at the end of 2008, that you really have very serious problems. Now, there's already a lot of great research on bubbles. They ultimately rest in human psychology. And Charles Kindleberger's book on this, which I cite quite often in my own book, is in many ways completely laid down what happened. They go back as far as financial markets, go back at least as far as the Dutch tulip mania of the 17th century. And we know what they're about. They're about the ebb and flow of greed and fear. You get a bubble when greed overcomes fear, and when you get some catalyst in the form of some believable reason why some new investment may do well, whether that's canals or locomotives or cars or internet stocks. Plainly, there was a case to be made there that got people excited. People obviously found tulips very pretty, some kind of a catalyst there. And then also the provision of cheap credit as the other catalyst, and then you will get a bubble, and that will be followed by a burst when fear snaps back. The thing about it, however, is that over history, bubbles tend only to recur once a generation, if not once every 2 generations, and that's, again, perfectly understandable from human psychology. Once you have been through a bubble, experienced what it feels like for it to burst, you tend to act a little wiser the next time. People behave a little more sensibly, and you need to wait until a new generation who hasn't been through that experience decides that it's different this time.